Thank you so much.
There is actually a technical reason why these comments become so toxic. It's that Google and Facebook's algorithms, and YouTube's, which is owned by Google, the algorithms are much more likely to present in front of you items, comments, stories, which are more extreme, because the more extreme ones are the ones that get you to interact, to press like or share or whatever it is. And advertisers obviously like material that is more likely to elicit a response. So unfortunately, the algorithms have created this hyperloop of toxicity online because
Not
it makes
good.
sense for advertisers.
As a developer from Google said after the wake of the mosque shootings, we tilt toward the bad.
The algorithm does. That's a choice those tech companies make.
right.
And we are way too relaxed about this. Even our Prime Minister, amazingly, is not taking as tough a line against those tech companies as the Australians did.
Yeah.
All right, now, just on a note on honesty, I found this rather absorbing. Actually, new research just published may prove that we're more honest than we might think. A few years back, research assistants found, quote unquote, 400 wallets in public buildings of various types, banks, libraries, bars, hundreds of wallets across 8 cities in India. Some of the wallets contained no money, others contained a few dollars together with ID cards. The results were published recently in Science magazine, and to quote one scientist, was something we didn't expect. An impressive 43% of the wallets containing money were reported to their owners, but the figure was much lower for cashless wallets. Now, the wallet drop experiment in India was part of a much larger global study of 17,000 wallets in 40 countries to examine the trade-off between honesty and self-interest. So, Heather, people were more likely to return wallets that had money in them. Finally, a good reason to celebrate human behaviour, surely.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And maybe the thinking was, well, people should have their money back, but if there's no money in it, maybe it's not such a loss to the person.
That's exactly right.
Whereas I actually have the other view, which is it's not the money that's important, it's the cards.
The cards,
because when you lose your wallet these days, because you've got driver's license, credit cards.
It's a mission, isn't it?
It's a mission to change it, and particularly if you've got all your bills being paid with credit cards.
But we don't know that these wallets had cards in them.
No, it's more about the money. I mean, the scientist, Bernard, said that one explanation for the results is altruism, that people care about others, including strangers. Is that how you see it?
That makes sense. I just think of what it would be like if I lost my wallet. I've actually got to the point now where I've tried to avoid having a wallet because they're just so painful to lose, and I've got everything in my phone. So now if I lose my phone, I'm really toast.
But I think people do often consider how they would like to be treated and treat other people in the same way.
That's what one psychologist said. There is actually a psychological issue of viewing oneself as a thief. It is easy not to feel dishonest when keeping a wallet, since you gain nothing from it. And it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if you had a wallet containing $50, $100, Heather, you'd hand it in.
I would. Yeah, if it was at the library, I'd take it up to the front desk, or if you found it on the street, to the police station.
But if you had a wallet containing no money, you'd keep it.
Not sure about that.
I'd give it back too.
You'd keep it for yourself, surely. Hey, what a wonderful team you've been, Heather Roy and Bernard Hinkey. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm Wallace Chapman.
Cheers.
See you tomorrow. Checkpoint next.
Ki te whakarongo mai koe, ki te reo irarangi Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. Good evening, I'm Alex Perrottet. On tonight's programme, a massive clean-up job in West Coast is underway, with volunteers brought to tears, looking at rubbish strewn across almost 1,300 hectares. Tense scenes near Mangere in Auckland this morning as bailiffs and police arrived with an eviction notice for protesters trying to stop a housing project. The Greens have apologised for teasing Simon Bridges about his accent after their own members took offence. The abortion debate heats up again as Cabinet prepares to consider a bill that would remove it from the Crimes Act. And who has been chosen as Britain's new Prime Minister? We'll have the latest ahead of the announcement much later tonight. You can watch us on Facebook, on our website, of course, Freeview Channel 50 and Face TV Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leopard tēnei. The Greens co-leader has apologised for any offence caused by an ad satirising the National Party leader Simon Bridges. The party pulled the ad from Twitter after a backlash from supporters and party members. It was an attempt to counter National's opposition to the government's plans to offer a discount for new electric vehicles. The video showed Mr Bridges in a car yard talking about cars and climate change with a voiceover in a broad New Zealand accent. Initially, Mr Shaw said the ad was to draw attention to National's negative campaigning, but within an hour he admitted it had backfired.
We were trying to use satire to make a point about National's use of attack ads. It didn't go well, and so we pulled the ad.
Are you embarrassed?
Well, look, as they say, explaining is losing, and if you've got to explain the joke, then clearly it wasn't as funny as you thought it was.
The Greens co-leader James Shaw. A former Auckland Council employee has been charged with bribery. The Serious Fraud Office has charged the man with accepting a bribe as a council official and obtaining by deception. His accused accomplice is charged with giving a gift to a council employee. Both have been granted interim name suppression after their first appearance in the Auckland District Court. They have been remanded on bail. Fletcher Building says the fact Kaumātua were involved in asking protesters to leave the Ihumātao site is a significant gesture. The company plans to build 480 houses on the land near Auckland Airport. A group has been occupying the land to stop the development, arguing the land is wahitapu, or sacred, for local hapu and iwi. This morning, bailiffs with Kaumātua from the local iwi, as well as Fletcher Building and police, arrived at the site with an eviction notice. Fletcher Building's Steve Evans says they have met with protesters for 3 years to try to find a solution.
It was a significant gesture from our point of view that today's request was not from Fletcher Building nor from police, but it actually came from Kaumātua and Kuia, who have lived at Ihumātao all of their lives. It was important from our point of view to support mana whenua, which is what we've done as they walked onto the land to take back what is their whenua.
Steve Evans says fencing is being put up and work is progressing. A Comanchero's gang member who murdered a young father and tried to murder his wife has been jailed for life. Viliami Tāne shot Abraham Tu'uheava and his wife Yolanda during a methamphetamine deal in Māngere in May last year. Mr Tu'uheava died at the scene, but his wife survived by pretending to be dead after being shot in the head twice. In sentencing Tāne in the High Court at Auckland, Justice Hinton said she agreed with the Crown's submission that the shooting was an execution-style killing. She described the offending as brutal and callous and said it had affected family members on both sides.
There could not be a more tragic illustration than this case of the true effects of gang membership and methamphetamine use.
Justice Hinton sentenced Tāne to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 17.5 years. Tāne's cousins will be sentenced for their involvement in the shooting next week. Family Planning says a bill that would remove abortion from the Crimes Act, which was expected to be presented to Cabinet Ministers today, is a promising step. The bill is expected to go to Cabinet next week and must be rubber-stamped before it can be debated in the House. Hundreds of people marched to Parliament today demanding reform of New Zealand's abortion laws. Family Planning's Chief Executive Jackie Edmonds, who was at the rally, says there is still a lot of work that needs to be done.
We are also nervous about what could be added in and whether parliamentarians start fiddling with the recommendations from the Law Commission.
Family Planning Chief Executive Jackie Edmonds. A mining blast expert says people in a Christchurch house that exploded are lucky it wasn't even worse. 6 people were injured following a gas explosion in Marble Court in the suburb of Northwood on Friday morning. University of Queensland Professor of Occupational Health and Safety in Mining, David Cliff, says the explosion creates a wave of pressure that can be lethal as gases rapidly expand. He says an explosion can pick up energy as it moves like waves in the ocean. Professor Cliff says the occupants may have been behind some kind of structure that shielded them from the full force of the pressure wave. A leopard seal has made its way, all the way, into Wellington's Oriental Bay, delighting about 30 onlookers. The seal was first spotted at about 8 o'clock this morning, and a cordon is keeping people away from the mammal which can bite. Department of Conservation Marine Advisor Hannah Hedrick says this is the first time a leopard seal has come so close to Wellington City. DOC staff are there to make sure people stay behind the barrier and to answer any questions. Ms Hedrick says a leopard seal came on shore at Putoni Harbour in 2018 and they visited the Wellington region once or twice each year. It's 5:05. The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen is playing down any suggestion this weekend's test against South Africa is a pointer to the team's World Cup opener in September. The Rugby Championship test in Wellington is the only meeting of the old rivals ahead of their highly anticipated clash in Yokohama on September the 21st. Hansen says both teams are in a building process and plenty can happen in 2 months.
It won't mean whoever wins this one will automatically win the one in the World Cup, and even then, whoever wins that game doesn't mean the other team's knocked out of the World Cup either, because it's a round-robin stage and you'd expect both teams to go through and qualify. I don't think it's going to affect the World Cup, no.
Steve Hansen. Netball legend Lois Muir believes the Diamonds crumbled when tasked with coming from behind in the World Cup final because it was a new concept to them. In assessing the Silver Ferns' shock 52-51 triumph in Liverpool, Muir says resilience built on years of Kiwi suffering was the difference. Muir believes Australia has also paid the price of an open slather approach to allowing unlimited imports into their Super Netball domestic league. Swimming's international governing body has issued a warning to the Australian swimmer Mac Horton over his controversial protest against Chinese rival Sun Yang. Horton refused to share the podium with Sun at the World Aquatics Championships in South Korea after finishing behind him in the 400-metre freestyle. He's previously accused Sun of being a drug cheat. That's the news.
Tougher firearms rules are on the way.
These are law-abiding people who are going to get targeted and have these huge administrative costs. It's not going to make diddly squat worth of difference to the safety of our communities.
Will they do the job?
If we'd known how many semi-automatic assault rifles were coming into New Zealand, maybe we would have said, hang on, is it appropriate they're Class A and everyone with a firearms licence can get one?
Morning Report with Corin Dan and Susie Ferguson. Weekdays from 6 on air, online and on Facebook.
Then on 9 to noon, 107 organisations, including some of our biggest corporates, have signed up to the Year-Old Climate Leaders Coalition. What exactly have they changed? And after 10, British writer Dorian Lynskey on why Orwell's 1984 is still the key to understanding the modern world. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, fine spells and a few showers, clearing tomorrow afternoon. Auckland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Fine and cloudy periods, a few showers about Bay of Plenty and Central High Country tonight, and in most places for a time tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, occasional rain, easing tomorrow evening. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, occasional showers, mainly light rain, clearing later tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, cloudy about the coast and Canterbury Plains with patchy drizzle, mainly fine inland but areas of low cloud or fog. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine, areas of low cloud or fog inland tonight and tomorrow morning. Chatham Islands, a few light showers. You're with RNZ National. Indira Stewart is back with First Up at 5 a.m. tomorrow, followed by Susie Ferguson and Corin Dan on Morning Report. It's now 5:08.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Welcome to Checkpoint. Good evening, I'm Alex Perrottet. Protesters remain at a police cordon which is barring the public from a disputed piece of land near Mangere in Auckland. Ihumatao is next to the Otuataua Stonefields Historic Reserve and has been the subject of a bitter dispute with one group determined to stop any development on the site. Part of it is zoned for a massive housing project which has been occupied by a group of protesters trying to stop any building whatsoever. But at 9 this morning, bailiffs with Kaumatua from the local iwi, supported by Fletcher Building, Māori wardens and police, arrived at the site with an eviction notice. 2 people were evicted, and soon after, protesters gathered at a police cordon near the site. Our reporter Joanna McKenzie and cameraman Nick Munro were there.
About 20 people gather at the entrance to Ihumatao Quarry Road. A handful of them face a line of police who are stopping anyone going up the road. There are about 50 police officers at the site.
2 hours ago, where are the road closure papers?
One woman with a baby challenges officers to show her documents giving them the right to stop people going on the road. She's formed a one-woman blockade refusing to move and stopping any trucks getting through.
Facts that I found unsafe amongst you peacekeepers because you haven't stated why you closed our road in the first place.
Only media were allowed through the cordon up to the buildings where the 2 people were evicted earlier in the day. Contractors have already started putting fences up, ready for work to begin. Pania Newton from the campaign group Save Our Unique Land, or SOL, says the eviction notice came as a complete shock.
Yeah, I had no idea actually. We had been working with police previously and they said that they would advise us of a date when they had planned on coming through. Obviously they did not give us those details, and this morning I woke to find that after my morning stroll I was coming home and we found 100 or so police officers, Fletcher employees and Māori wardens on our doorstep asking us to leave our whenua.
She says last week they were given a promise that they would be told when the eviction notice would be served.
And for them just to arrive on our doorstep at 8:30 this morning is really disheartening, and it again solidifies for me my distrust for the New Zealand police.
The dispute has pitted whānau against whānau, with some local iwi supporting the development while Pania Newton's group oppose it. She says the issues at stake are too important to give up on.
This isn't a matter of who has a greater interest or who has mana whenua status or who doesn't. Me and my cousins created this rōpū 5 years ago, and we maintain that this is a rōpū, a SOL is a rōpū that is led by rangatahi of our whenua and of our marae.
Back at the police cordon, people are arriving as some leave. Hene Croft is one of those who got a call this morning to come down and support the protest.
They're currently barricading us from walking the whenua. This is a peaceful protest, so I'm not sure why these people are here. But we're just here to tautoko and support our whānau who are currently here.
She says she'll be there as long as she has to.
I will stay here as long as I need to in order to ensure that the kaupapa is safe and people are safe.
The police told RNZ that they assisted with the eviction and also with Fletcher Building's traffic management plan approved by Auckland Transport, stopping the public from getting onto Ihumātao Quarry Road. Meanwhile, Fletcher says it's tried to engage with SOL since 2016, but the group has never shown a willingness to find a solution. In a statement, it says the Oruarangi development has been tested in the Māori Land Court, Environment Court and the United Nations, where all objections have been unsuccessful. But Pania Newton says no matter what, she's in this fight for the long haul and will never give up.
I've sacrificed my career, I've sacrificed time with my whānau and my friends because I know how important my tūranga waiwai and to protect that is for the generations that are yet to come.
Pania Newton from the campaign group Save Our Unique Land, ending that report from Joanna McKenzie and cameraman Nick Monroe. Do go back and have a look at our website or on Facebook to check out the pictures there from the cordon this morning. It's 13 and a half minutes past 5. Hundreds of people marched to Parliament today calling for reform of New Zealand's abortion laws as Cabinet prepares to consider a bill that would remove abortion from the Crimes Act. Currently, the law allows for abortion to be performed only to save the life of the mother or to preserve her physical or mental health, and only if the procedure is approved by 2 doctors or consultants. While the pro-choice march was underway, a petition against the proposed law change with 13,000 signatures was presented to MPs. Pro-choice groups see the bill as a promising step towards decriminalisation, while pro-life groups say it's the most extreme abortion law in this country's history. Katie Scotcher reports.
Abortion is not a crime. Now's the time. Abortion is not a crime.
More than 200 people marched to Parliament this morning, demanding reform of New Zealand's abortion law. The rally was met by representatives from Family Planning, Abortion Rights Aotearoa, Victoria University, as well as Associate Justice Minister Jan Logie and Dame Margaret Sparrow. Dame Margaret, who has been campaigning for reform since 1969, told the crowd that now is the time for change.
We've got a new opportunity, we've got new MPs. There's been such a lot of changes in the last 41 years, changes in society, changes in women's lives, changes in medicine, changes in medical technology. We need to change our law.
As people chanted outside, Cabinet ministers met inside Parliament to look over a draft bill that would remove abortion from the Crimes Act. Family Planning Association Chief Executive Jackie Edmonds says this step is promising.
We are also nervous about what could be added in and whether parliamentarians start fiddling with the recommendations from the Law Commission.
In October last year, the Law Commission presented its advice to Justice Minister Andrew Little, which recommended 3 options for reform, all of which decriminalised abortion. The first option is for a woman and her doctor to decide. Another is that a mental health assessment is carried out for all abortions. And the third would only require a woman's mental health being examined after 22 weeks of pregnancy. Whatever option has been chosen hasn't been made public yet, but Ms Edmonds hopes it's the first. Sue Claridge from the Auckland Women's Health Council also supports this option. She says abortion needs to be treated as a health issue, not a mental health issue.
It is important that women considering abortion are provided the option of having counselling, but to somehow suggest all women's mental health is so poor that that's the only reason, that they have to have some sort of test of their mental health. I don't think that's helpful. I think, again, it's demeaning and it takes agency away from women over their own body.
Michelle Kaufman from Family Life International, a pro-life lobby group, says she's disappointed the government is even considering decriminalising abortion. She says all unborn children need to be protected from the first moment of their existence.
They are deserving of life. They have a right to life. Without the right to life, we have no other rights. And they are deserving of protection, just as a born child is deserving of protection and care and support. And to be honest, our women and families need protecting from abortion.
It was expected the Legislative Cabinet Committee would give the green light to the draft bill today. The full Cabinet is then expected to rubber stamp it before it's debated in the House. It will be treated as a conscience issue, which means MPs don't have to vote along party lines. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who has been a vocal advocate for reform, says she doesn't know how members of the Labour Party will vote.
Some drafts have been discussed with members across Parliament. Obviously, they'll want to see the final legislation once that process is complete. Ultimately, this is a matter for them, though, and as I say, I hope it's given due consideration.
National Party leader Simon Bridges wouldn't say if he supported the bill.
I want to read it and really think about it before I launch into what will obviously be a controversial topic for New Zealanders.
Senior National MP Amy Adams has been pulled in to help Mr Little with the proposed reform. Ms Adams, who is retiring at the next election, is broadly supportive of what she's seen of the proposed legislation. Simon Bridges says this doesn't concern him, as people are entitled to their views. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
It's 5:18 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. We're keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A record number of volunteers, some brought to tears, raced against time today to clean up hundreds of kilometres of rubbish littering the west coast. Heavy rain washed up an old landfill 4 months ago, not far from Fox Township, dislodging old plastic bags, bottles and clothing across an area of almost 1,300 hectares along the riverbanks. What started as a small group of volunteers has now exploded into a massive Department of Conservation clean-up operation. More than 100 volunteers were joined on the Fox River banks today by the Defence Force, who are supplying off-road vehicles to get to previously inaccessible areas. Our video journalist Logan Church is with them and filed this report.
Kia ora, welcome to Operation Tidy Fox Week 5.
It's 8:30 in the morning and we're outside the dock office in Fox Glacier Township. More than 100 volunteers are here, the biggest number ever seen during this clean-up, dubbed Operation Fox. Among them is Nikki Carter from Christchurch.
It's terrible. It's really awful. You know, New Zealand has this allegedly clean green image about it, and this doesn't do us any favours at all. And I think, you know, as a country we have a responsibility to make sure we've got to take this seriously.
Operation Fox has been underway now for several weeks, with DOC taking over this job from the local council about a month ago. And this week the army arrived. They brought with them six-wheeled Pinzgauer vehicles, which can tackle the rocky, muddy riverside with ease. It's not long before we're all bundled into these, as well as small tourist buses and dock cars. Today's clean-up is underway. On one side of Fox River is 12-year-old Cody Hopapa and his grandmother Sue. They travelled all the way from the small king country town of Taumaranui.
So we arrived on Sunday and then we worked from Monday to Friday and then had 2 days off. Yeah. And then we're going to be working for another 2 weeks.
What sort of stuff, Cody, are you picking up? What are you seeing?
Just plastic bags, like containers from fizzy drinks, lollipop sticks.
And Sue Hopapa says the sheer scale of what's happened here is simply overwhelming.
I'd been thinking about coming down prior to that, but that really did it, I think. And then I just thought, I really need to do something about this. So I just started... It's a bit emotional.
No, it's all right. It's quite something, isn't it, seeing what's here?
Yeah. Sorry.
It's okay.
So I just started making a few phone calls and here we are.
Fifi from Dunedin, who was expecting a baby in December, is sifting through a nearby pile of branches and rocks.
My partner and I had a week's leave booked months ago, sort of a baby moon or something exciting. But yeah, when this came up, it just seemed sort of criminal to not come and help. We've got family support in Dunedin that can look after our other girl that we've got, and yeah, come over and do our bit. Might be like osmosis, like sort of through the blood, the baby's going to pick up this, you know, sort of good vibes and you know, maybe be a little bit more aware of what we use and abuse in the future.
Crossing the river, teams are climbing through dense bush, rubbish piled high and tangled through branches and shrub. They are joined by dozens of Defence Force personnel. Here they find all sorts in what looks like a never-ending scene of rubbish, including old bread bags, a very old chocolate bar.
I found a lot of beer cans, a lot of plastic. It's the soft plastics that we're finding heaps of, bread bags, sanitary pads, puppy poo bags, lots of puppy poo bags.
45 Defence Force personnel are expected to stay on site until mid-August. Lieutenant Kevin Kim says they'll help pick up rubbish and operate the trucks and other machinery they brought with them.
So we've got these Pinzgauer vehicles, which are off-road capability and personnel carriers. So we're using that to transport personnel in and out of the operations site. We also have 2 HX60 MHOP vehicles. So we're using those vehicles to uplift the fadges, which are essentially large bags of rubbish, and we're transporting them to the dump sites where the contractors will come and transport it to Hokitika to another landfill.
The clean-up crews have completed almost half of the first zone, which is about 389 hectares and starts at the old landfill site. Zone 2 is another 881 hectares, and then there are 64 kilometres of coastline. But Dock Officer Owen Kilgour says the work needs to be completed by spring, otherwise they are in trouble.
So the West Coast's known for heavy rain. The locals that have been here for a long time will tell you sort of around Labour weekend can be when typically we start getting some pretty substantial flooding. If we don't pick the rubbish up before the spring floods, it's going to wash down the river into the ocean and into marine reserves. So it's really critical that we pick that plastic up before it ends up in the sea.
And while there are record numbers of volunteers here today, Doc are concerned momentum might slacken off. Owen Kilgour says far fewer people have registered for next week. For the people who do turn up, it's a race against time and the weather. On the Fox River for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Yeah, amazing scenes there on the Fox River. It'd be good if you could check out those pictures that Logan caught, because you can understand why some of those volunteers are crying just looking at the enormity of the job at hand there. It's coming up to 25 minutes past 5. The family home should no longer be treated automatically as relationship property to be split 50-50 in the event of a breakup. That's the view of the Law Commission, which has released its final report today following its review of the Property Relationships Act. Barrister Vivienne Crawshaw specialises in family law with a focus on relationship property matters. She says of the many recommendations the report makes, the public will notice 4 main things.
One is the changes to the family home. 2 is future family income sharing awards, so no economic disparity payments. 3, trusts and how they impact on relationship property. So that's a big change. And 4 is the court's role in considering the children's needs in the division of relationship property, so that's a big change too.
Okay, maybe we can just go first, because what's been changed first of all is a break of the clean break principle. That's where the partners split up and immediately the house is divided between the two 50-50. What we're looking at now, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that only property that has increased in value since the couple has been together, even in a de facto relationship that's been there for more than 3 years, only that increase in value will be split 50-50. That's pretty much been confirmed.
Yeah, so that's the change to the family home. That's not so much the clean break principle. And remember, the clean break principle is something that people have talked about and judges have talked about, but it's actually not in the legislation. So the family home change is significant, because I think really since the 1970s, most New Zealanders have got their head around the fact that if you live with someone or you're married with someone and it's more than a short duration relationship, you're going to have to share that family home equally, no matter how it was acquired, who bought it, whether it was inherited from great aunties or what. The change primarily, as you've said, is going to be that actually that is not going to be shared equally. In fact, if you've brought that home to the relationship, that is not going to suddenly become relationship property, because the focus is going to be on the family joint venture, as in what the couple do together, as opposed to the use concept, which is family use then makes the asset relationship property. So that's a big change.
So what do you see as the major changes here, and particularly for the uninitiated, what's there to look out for?
Well, one of the big changes is with trusts, because at the moment somebody might be able to set up a trust or settle property on a trust during a relationship or with the purposes of avoiding sharing relationship property. And it's a bit of a devil to be able to claw back that property. So it's like a contracting out agreement with one hand clapping. With contracting out agreements, you both have to have independent advice. If you settle property on a trust, you don't, and one person can go off and do that. Now, there are ways of protecting the disadvantaged party, but it's not easy. It's not straightforward. And there are 2 different statutory means of doing that, one under the Property Relationships Act and one other under another statute, and it's complex. So the Law Commission is suggesting some much more broad, bold ways of dealing with trusts that are set up and property settled on those trusts during the relationship. And I think that's quite a positive move. That really keeps us in line with other Western and Commonwealth countries.
What about dealing with prenuptial agreements? There's a lot of debate about whether there should be more awareness about those, whether couples should be getting into them beforehand. In this proposal, will those prenuptial agreements trump what's in the Act, or will it be the other way around?
Well, there will still be a means of setting aside prenuptial agreements or contracting out agreements if there's to do that is to cause serious injustice. What's being proposed here under this new proposal of the Law Commission is that if the court considers that parts of the agreement are unjust, they can set aside parts of the agreement rather than the entirety of the agreement. That's kind of a pretty positive change. One thing that concerns me and many others is that there will now be an ability to contract out of the future income sharing arrangements that I can talk to in a minute. And that's problematic because when a couple enter a relationship and they're both financially independent, it's quite hard to imagine what it might be like to have triplets or, at least some children that have really negatively impacted on your career prospects. And if you've contracted out of those provisions, that could really result in an agreement being quite unjust on a separation where one person's completely left out of the cold financially. Because remember, what they're also proposing is doing away with spousal maintenance. So at the moment you can't contract out of spousal maintenance, but you are going to be able to contract out of this family income sharing arrangement.
Criticism in the past has been that there's an attitude that the couple will do everything in the best interests of the children. These changes have been spruiked as doing more things in the interests of children. There's been calls by the Children's Commissioner, Andrew Beckcroft, to look at that as well. What's the detail there? Yeah, so this is significant. We've already got a provision in our Act where the interests of children is a consideration, but it just hasn't happened. So what the Law Commission is suggesting is that the children's interests be an overarching consideration in the division of property. That is a significant change, so it'll be an overarching obligation on the courts to have regard to the best interests of any minor or dependent children. And the way the Commission have framed this is that there will be a sort of fundamental obligation to ensure that there is an occupation order of, say, the family home or what was the home that the parties lived in to provide the children with a home. And that is actually a broader provision than we have currently, and it's not used as much as it could be. So that will be quite a change, and so perhaps that might ameliorate the kind of harsher consequences of the changes to the family home. So, I mean, the Commission has emphasised this as a package of reforms, and certainly is if you took one out and left others, it would become unbalanced. That's Barrister Vivian Crawshaw on those proposed changes to the Property Relationships Act. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the Green Party yanks an attack ad mocking Simon Bridges, fears a serial killer may be on the loose in Canada, and the boss of the International Netball Federation on why prize money just isn't a priority. We love your feedback. Don't forget you can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us at Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Susanna Leatawa with the headlines.
Thank you. The Greens have apologised for any offence caused by an ad satirising the National Party leader Simon Bridges. The Twitter ad was a bid to counter National's opposition to the government's plans to offer a discount for new electric vehicles. It showed Mr Bridges in a car yard talking about climate change and mocked his accent. Mr Bridges says the ad was funny, but it shows they are sensitive about some issues. Fletcher Building says its work is progressing despite its trucks being stopped from getting into a controversial housing development in South Auckland. The company wants to start developing the site at Ihumatao near Auckland Airport, which has been occupied by protesters. Earlier today, 2 people were evicted and fences were put up, but campaigners are now preventing any more trucks getting through a police cordon. A former Auckland Council employee charged with bribery has been remanded on bail after reappearing in the Auckland District Court. The Serious Fraud Office has charged the man with accepting a bribe as a council official and obtaining by deception, and his accomplice with giving a gift to a council employee. Both the accused have been granted interim name suppression. A Comancheros gang member has been jailed for at least 17 and a half years for murder and attempted murder. Viliamitani shot Abraham Tuuhiava dead and wounded his wife Yolanda during a drug deal in Mangere last year. Sentencing Tani at the High Court in Auckland today, Justice Hinton said the execution-style killing was brutal and callous and damaged both families. Family Planning has welcomed promising a bill which would remove abortion from the Crimes Act. The bill is expected to go to Cabinet next week and must be approved before it can be debated in the House. Hundreds of people marched to Parliament today demanding reform of the abortion laws. New Zealand First has submitted an amendment to the end-of-life choice bill that would require a binding referendum at the 2020 election. The supplementary order paper calls for a referendum to decide whether euthanasia becomes legal if the bill passes through Parliament. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Nona Peltier joins us now for the business news. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
So, Nona, workers are not very satisfied about their lives.
Well, most are actually satisfied, but
most
some
of
are.
them are.
Most are satisfied, but
Okay.
some are dissatisfied. So just over 4%, but that works out to 113,000 people. So it's not a small number of people who are dissatisfied, and these aren't people who are just dissatisfied. Some are deeply dissatisfied in that group. Yes, and believe it or not, those people who are deeply dissatisfied are also dissatisfied with their own lives. And it mirrors what the statistics department has found with unemployed people, which also equal that same number. So we're talking about 250,000 people who are dissatisfied with their lives, whether they're working or not. And most of the time it's because the ones who are working, they don't like their workplace environment. It's stressful. And I guess they don't think they're getting paid enough probably as well. And those kinds of things are impacting their health. So the statistics department look at these numbers every, 4 or 5 years? And they took this survey of 9,000 people late last year. Right. And I guess it's about looking at the well-being of the people in our world. And I guess I asked whether or not that would feed into our well-being measures. They weren't too sure about that. But nevertheless, they do collect this data, and it was kind of interesting.
So you're saying it correlates with, at least the number of deeply dissatisfied correlates with the number of unemployed?
Yeah, so overall, we're talking about 250,000 people wandering around feeling pretty unhappy whether they're working or not.
And it's not just because they're not being paid enough.
No, it's a number of things. It's communication, it's stress in the workplace, it's all the things that we all know upset us, but some people are really deeply dissatisfied with their environment, and that is a bit of a concern for sure.
Turning to the Financial Markets Authority, they have plans to increase their scrutiny of the conduct and culture of these firms and listed companies over the next year. We've heard a lot about this, and it seems that it's the new normal.
Well, the Financial Markets Authority come up with a work plan every year, as you'd expect. It's a regulator, and so now this year they're going to focus very much on banks and insurance sector, which is primarily their job anyway. But they're going to pull them up and they're going to say, listen, you're not doing a good enough job when it comes to looking after consumers. We're concerned about your misconduct, and we know it's going on, so you can be sure that we're coming after you. We're going to pay a lot more attention to what you're doing, and they're expecting the sector to pull up their socks. It's in their own interest, they suggest. And anyway, we should expect to see more from the Financial Markets Authority on the culture and conduct of banks. Certainly it's been in the news a lot, as you can, as you know, and our listeners will know too.
Good. And the markets, how do they look?
Interesting. We finished up again, 0.4%, 43 points up to a record 10,867. And this is really because the market is expecting an interest rate cut from the Federal Reserve, which is interesting, but maybe not as much of an interest rate cut as they were hoping for, but nevertheless, still enough to support the markets. Our dollar is a little bit mixed. There's some concern about maybe the Reserve Bank is going to tinker with monetary policy. So we saw a little bit of a dip, not a lot, but we're 67.3 US cents. That's still quite strong. 95.9 Australian and 54 pence. And of course, that's just ahead of what we're expecting to hear out of the UK with their new Prime Minister to be heard this morning.
All right. We'll keep an eye out and near out for that. I think it's going to be pretty late tonight. But
well, late tonight here, but this morning.
Almost
this morning, I guess, in the UK, right?
Yeah. Thanks very much, Nana. Always good to have you here in the studio, the very latest in the business world. It's just coming up to 21 minutes to 6. The Green Party has quickly backed down on an attempted attack ad on Simon Bridges, with its own supporters criticising the party for lowering its standards. This afternoon, the Greens tweeted a video that took aim at the National Party leader by making fun of his distinctive accent and his low polling. But after backlash online, the video was deleted and an apology issued within hours of it being published. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
Come on down to Simon's Imports and check out these low prices that I've got on this climate-friendly cars.
This video, posted online by the Green Party, turned footage of Nationals leader into a mock car sales ad, dubbed over by an actor.
Look, I love electric cars, but now the government's making them affordable. It just makes me so angry.
It was an attempt to counter Nationals' opposition to the government's plans to offer a discount for new electric vehicles by adding a fee to new high-polluting vehicles. Greens co-leader James Shaw says National has been spreading misinformation about the policy in this attack ad, was trying to shine light on that.
We're trying to say this is so ridiculous, it should be funny. And my worry is that in New Zealand, we're starting to see elements of the kind of campaigning that you saw in the Australian election campaign, in the Brexit campaign, in the Trump campaign, and we do not want that here in New Zealand. It has to stop.
He denies that the video was intended to poke fun at Mr Bridges' accent.
We were just trying to accurately get it. I actually did have a think about what would it be like if you got someone who couldn't accurately portray that accent. But the point here is that what we're trying to do is to say to people, look, this is an absurd way to campaign.
And co-leader Marama Davidson says the focus on Mr Bridges' polling wasn't intended as a low blow.
I think it speaks to why he doesn't have support, because he refuses to take real action on climate change.
However, the ad sparked outrage from Green supporters online, and the party deleted the post, saying it had been raised that the ad was in poor taste and lowered the tone of the debate. They said they were using satire to call attention, but it had obviously landed poorly, and they apologised for causing offence. While Mr Bridges was laughing the ad off, he says the strategy shows the government is feeling the pressure.
We're holding the government to account on their taxing of New Zealanders. They want to hold me to account on my accent. They know that us holding them to account on tax works, because everyday New Zealanders hate it. They don't want to see the cost of living, the taxes going up, and that's why the gloves from Labor and the Green Party are really coming off this week.
Labor has generally steered clear of negative campaigning since Jacinda Ardern promised to be a relentlessly positive leader. But this week it posted an excerpt of a Morning Report interview with Simon Bridges discussing climate change, along with an unflattering picture and the caption, "Simon Bridges has talked a big game on climate change, but when push comes to shove, he won't back the action that's needed." But Ms Ardern is standing by the ad.
We do still need to be able to hold each other to account, and each individual party will do that in their own way.
National is no stranger to the attack ad. Earlier this year, one of its ads claiming Labor was all sausage, no sizzle, was criticised for its use of mansplaining.
The reality is we're not a party that said we're going to do kindness. Julianne Genter said last week climate change was no laughing matter. Look, clearly they've changed things.
However, the Greens have made a quick U-turn on today's ad.
As they say, explaining is losing, and if you've got to explain the joke, then clearly it wasn't as funny as you thought it was. We've actually always held ourselves to a higher standard, and I think what you've just seen is a whole lot of our own members and supporters saying, actually, we want to maintain that.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
And we did invite James Shaw to speak to us on Checkpoint tonight, but we were told he was unavailable. What do you think? Was that offensive? Were you offended by it? Was it in poor taste? Should the Greens have pulled the ad, or should they have kept it there? Should we all toughen up a little bit? Is that just part of holding people to account? Let us know on the text 2101. And, well, of course, you can email us and you can send us a tweet if you like as well. And it's just coming up to, 17 minutes to 6. And we're going next to Hong Kong, I believe. Where are we? Hong Kong's opposition Democratic Party has blamed triad gangsters for an attack on passengers at a train station at the weekend. Men in white shirts were caught on camera beating people returning home from anti-government protests earlier in the day. Michelle Hennessy reports, and just a warning, if you are watching, some of the footage is graphic.
Hong Kong's political crisis has taken a violent new turn. This graphic footage came from a reporter who live streamed the attack at a rural train station Sunday night. After weeks of clashes between demonstrators and police, the spotlight has shifted to the territory's shadowy criminal network. Some opposition lawmakers say the men in white were triad gangsters. They were seen attacking passengers. One Democratic lawmaker said they appeared to target people wearing black shirts, coming back from the day's anti-government protests. The scene quickly descended into chaos. Authorities say 45 people were injured in the attacks, with one in critical condition. One lawmaker said it took police more than an hour to show up after he called them. One man was seen begging on the metro and later beaten up by men in white. On Monday, police defended their actions and the lack of arrests. Hong Kong's police chief said the force had waited for reinforcements. Rolling protests are still taking place across Hong Kong. What started as a movement against the now suspended extradition bill is morphing into a list of demands, with some calling for full democracy in the Chinese-ruled city.
We urge the government to stop leading Hong Kong toward the brink of destruction and work together with the people to bring our city back to a path of a united, democratic and free, just society.
Police say they made the largest seizure of its kind in the city when explosives and weapons were found in an industrial building on Friday. It's still unclear if they were related to the weekend's protests. On Sunday, thousands had descended on China's representative office in the city, throwing eggs and spray painting graffiti on its walls. They were finally driven away by police using tear gas and rubber bullets. Leader Carrie Lam said it was a challenge to national sovereignty, but demonstrators have said they won't stop until their demands are met.
That's Michelle Hennessy reporting there, coming up to 14 minutes to 6. A chilling mystery is unfolding along the isolated highways of northwestern Canada, with fears a serial killer may be at work. It began with the double murder last week of an Australian man and his American girlfriend. Lucas Fowler and China Deese were found shot dead by the side of the Alaska Highway in British Columbia. 23-year-old Lucas was the son of a senior New South Wales police officer who has now travelled to Canada to help with the investigation. The ABC's Rachel Mealy has the story.
Stephen Fowler has already been at too many press conferences like this one.
As you know, I may be an experienced police officer, but today I'm standing here as the father of a murder victim. We are just distraught. This has really torn two families apart.
Chief Inspector Fowler works in Sydney's Hills District. He flew to Canada over the weekend along with some colleagues from New South Wales Police.
As a police officer, you work with families all the time, but nothing prepares my family for what we are going through now.
He said his son Lucas had been on the adventure of a lifetime.
Lucas was just a fun-loving guy who had a goal to travel the world. He saved up all his money whilst he was working in Sydney. He set out on an adventure with a mate. Along that tour, he met China, and they became an inseparable pair. You know, it's a love story that's ended tragically. It really is. It's the worst ever love story, because we now have two young people who had everything ahead of them tragically murdered.
The Royal Canadian Mounted Police have released a sketch of a man they'd like to speak to. The picture shows a middle-aged man with dark skin and a beard. Sergeant Janelle Shoyat says the man was seen by others talking to the couple.
The man, seen in this composite sketch, was seen speaking to Lucas on the evening of July 14th, 2019 on Highway 97.
The bodies of Lucas Fowler and China Deese were found on the side of the remote highway in northern British Columbia last week. Police now acknowledge that the crime could be linked to the recent disappearance of two Canadian teenagers from a local province, as well as the discovery of another dead body in bushland.
You know, it's unusual to have two major investigations undergoing of this nature in northern BC at the same time. And so we recognize that there is a possibility that these could be linked.
To trigger people's memories, the Canadian police have also released CCTV footage of Lucas Fowler and China Deese stopping for petrol in the days before they were murdered. The pair hop out of their blue van at the service station and embrace before China walks off to the roadhouse and Lucas turns to the Bowser.
Rachel Mealy with that report right on 11 minutes to 6. The head of the International Netball Federation says its first priority is to make sure teams can just cover their costs of playing in the World Cup by bringing in more sponsorship. That's after it was revealed that the Silver Ferns won't be eligible for any prize money after winning the Cup early yesterday, bringing into stark relief the situation for many female athletes. By contrast, the Black Caps reaped $3 million for coming runners-up in the Cricket Men's World Cup. Claire Brigel is the CEO of the International Netball Federation. She told me a little earlier that prize money has never been discussed within the federation.
The whole event really is run on a very, very tight budget. The level of sponsorship, the level of ticket sales are essential. Support from governments are essential. But, the teams have to pay their own way to get there. So if there is any surplus after the event, then a little bit of that is shared with the participating teams. But as a whole event, you cannot compare the Netball World Cup, unfortunately, when it comes to money, with any of the other male or even some of the female World Cups that are out there. So obviously the Soccer World Cup, FIFA Women's World Cup. So I think you have to look at where the sport is globally, and I guess we're evolving. Prize money is paid in a couple of countries in a very, very small way in some tournaments, but it isn't something that's ever been in the frame of reference for the INF.
Okay, and are you thinking of changing that? Do you have a strategy moving forward to see how these professional women might be paid more?
Well, I mean, Alex, most of the athletes in the top three teams are now either professional or semi-professional. But beyond that, the majority of athletes that were there this weekend they're all working. They're students. They're not fortunate enough to even be earning a salary. So I think our first priority for the Netball World Cup would probably be to find a way to actually make sure that the teams themselves, their costs were covered with the event, and that would probably be the first ambition, to actually bring in enough sponsorship into the event that teams don't have to worry about getting to participate in the first place. And I think that will make a tremendous amount of difference. We've been researching with our members their funding sources, and still, even for something like a World Cup, many of the athletes there's an element of self-funding. And that just seems a nonsense when the sport, I was talking about comparisons with other sports. Well, the sport is just as exciting. People enjoy the games just as much. Maybe not as many as are used to watching the men's games, but there's a long way to go in terms of the financial resources available for athletes in the sport.
Was there any talk of perhaps sponsors providing more or providing incentives and prize money for the winners?
Oh, I wish I could say there was, actually, Alex. No, there's never been any discussion of prize money in the sport. It's just not in the vocabulary, really. So I think we've got to recognise that women athletes are treated very, very differently to male athletes. They train just as hard. It's just as hard to get in the squad, but they are just about scraping a living right now in general terms, and quite often they're missing time from their careers. Otherwise they might be a doctor or a lawyer, and they actually take time out unpaid so they can play their sports. So, these women are making hard choices just to compete on behalf of their country. It's a tough life, but they are so ambitious and they are so proud to do it.
Now, what's the strategy then? How do we change this? Because we're told that, well, you've just got to get more people watching the game, and then you monetize the game and you get advertising dollars and that kind of thing. So, I mean, do you see things improving in that sense, or is there still a long way to go in terms of changing attitudes and getting more people watching?
Well, it's brutal, but it's the truth that you need the eyeballs. The traditional sponsorship is all about having an audience, and people are quite traditional in the way that in which they spend their sponsorship money. There are sponsors coming into the sport, and it's starting to change, but I see there's a long way to go, and it doesn't go much beyond the top 3 or 4 nations. It's changing slowly. If you look at the number of professional players now that there were compared with a few years ago, the professional leagues are doing the business there. They're starting to grow, but still, if you've got a league in a country like Australia, you perhaps only have 2 of the matches televised a week. In the UK, perhaps only 1 of each of the week's matches are televised. So broadcasters have got a role to play there in terms of actually putting more netball on television. I mean, there was some unusual, some new sponsorship, some new television models going out over this World Cup. The host broadcaster in the UK was Sky, but they actually shared it with the BBC, and the BBC was able to put all the games out on the red button on the digital channel, and Sky had all the games going out on their YouTube. So the ambition there was really to grow the interest for the next season of the Netball Super League. So they are trying to grow the audience, and that will have an impact.
The CEO of the International Netball Federation, Claire Brigel there. And we have got another statement from ANZ, of course, the sponsors of the Silver Ferns. This is also in relation to their lack of prize money after winning the World Cup. The statement from ANZ says, over the last 10 years, through highs and lows, ANZ's invested about $30 million to help grow the sport of netball in New Zealand across all levels of the game, from the grassroots to the elite. The Silver Ferns World Cup victory was inspirational, this statement says, so ANZ is happy to work with other key stakeholders to contribute to a fund in recognition of the team's commitment and dedication. We'll try to get more detail on that as it comes to us just on 4.5 minutes to 6. A leopard seal has made it all the way into Wellington's Oriental Bay, the first time the mammal is believed to have come so close to the capital city. The seal was first spotted at about 8 o'clock this morning. Now, if you're watching, you can see pictures of the seal right now. Richard McLean from the Wellington City Council is at the cordon, which is keeping people away. He's on the phone right now. Good evening to you, Richard.
Good evening, Alex. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. How's the seal? What's it up to at the moment?
Well, the seal is sitting here. It's got a crowd of admirers of probably about, 20 or 30 people, and it's sitting between some orange road cones and some police tape, and it's resolutely ignoring everybody and is yawning every few minutes and flapping one of its flippers. So it's very relaxed anyway.
So it just needs to take a rest. It's chosen a fairly public place to do it.
It has, yeah. It's actually in the Clyde Quay Boat Harbour, which is just beside Oriental Bay, and it's actually just parked up on a slipway, and so it looks like it's very content, just having a bit of a rest, and probably, I think DOCA are here and just advising everyone just to leave it alone, and it'll probably go about its way in the next day or so, but who knows?
Of course, people have been kept away because apparently these things have quite the bite on them. How close are people allowed to get to it?
Well, I think it's basically the closest people are probably about 4 or 5 metres away from it behind the tape. But the DOC have helpfully left a advisory sign here which advises to keep children and dogs away from it, because they'll probably be putting their lives in extreme danger if they get too close. And apparently I read somewhere today where these things have been known to kill people, so the advice should be heeded by the sounds of it.
Well, have they got a DOC or other people? I mean, there might be people from the council, if you can let us know. Are there any others sort of around just, I don't know, reacting to the fact that these things can be quite dangerous?
Well, I think people are keeping a respectful distance, put it that way, because, I mean, it's kind of moving about. It just sort of reared its head up about 30 seconds ago and had a bit of a look around. But, I think the advice given the notice here is stay well clear, because, it will take your arm, probably.
And no sign of any other wildlife? No little blue penguins flapping about there?
Yeah, we're sort of getting used to, wildlife sort of raiding sushi bars and coming up on slipways. And, last year we had the whale, which kind of brought our fireworks display to a halt, etc. So it's probably, could be said that it's a really cool thing that all this wildlife is coming back into the harbour. But, best idea is to stay well clear, otherwise it might become at dinner by the looks of it.
That's right. I was hoping the leopard seal doesn't try to make its way into a sushi bar, and hopefully it just stays well within the harbour. But it looks pretty comfortable where it is for now.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just parked up. I mean, I think the word would be lolling. It's just lying there lolling away, basically, and probably having a bit of a kip.
Good on you. Hey, thanks, Richard. Richard McLeod there, McLean. Richard McLean, who's standing by looking at that leopard seal who's taking it easy there at Wellington Harbour. Just before we've got about a minute before we get to the news, there's been a bit of feedback. No shock that people are reacting to that Greens attack out on Simon Bridges that has been pulled. Graham's been in touch. He's not a Simon Bridges fan. He says if Simon spoke clearly and intelligently, then there'd be no need for this type of ad. Keep it up, Green Party. And Di is kind of agreeing, saying no need to mock the opposition leader's accent. The policies on climate change are laughable on their own. Play the ball, not the person. National's ball on climate change is flat. And but then there's a whole host of people who are against what's been done there by the Greens. This advert, this is one person on the text, this advert was so not what we New Zealanders are about, too similar to a dirty politicking. And there's been a few, I think we've got an email here as well, saying, this person's Roger, saying, I don't believe the Green Party's advertisement making fun of Simon Bridges was over the top. It might be different if Simon Bridges was a less abrasive personality, but he's not. He's happy to hand it out, and he should be prepared to receive it. So that's Roger. Thanks for getting in touch. We'll see if we can get to a bit more of your feedback after the news.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leopard tēnei. 3 people have been arrested at a police cordon barring anyone from entering the land at Ihumatao near Auckland Airport. The site is due to be developed by Fletcher Building but has been the subject of a bitter dispute and occupation. 2 people were evicted this morning and there has been a heavy police presence there all day. The arrests were made for obstructing police who will remain at the site until the situation has been resolved. Meanwhile, an urgent hui is due to start about now. The campaign group Save Our Unique Land says police promised to tell them before an eviction took place, but this morning's actions came as a surprise. The group's leader, Pania Newton, says that has left her disheartened, but she's determined to keep fighting for the land.
I will sacrifice everything. I've sacrificed my career, I've sacrificed time with my whānau and my friends because I know how important my tūranga waiwai and to protect that is for the generations that are yet to come.
Pania Newton. The Greens co-leader has apologised for any offence caused by an ad satirising the National Party leader Simon Bridges. The party pulled the ad from Twitter after a backlash from supporters and party members. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The ad was an attempt to counter National's opposition to the government's plans to offer a discount for new electric vehicles. The video showed Mr Bridges in a car yard talking about cars and climate change with a voiceover in a broad New Zealand accent. Initially, Mr Shaw said it was to draw attention to National's negative campaigning, but within an hour he admitted it had backfired and apologised to anyone who'd taken offence. Mr Bridges says he found the ad funny, but it shows the government is sensitive on certain issues, particularly on tax. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
Nationals leader Simon Bridges won't say how he'll vote on a bill that would remove abortion from the Crimes Act. The draft legislation was expected to be presented to Cabinet Ministers today. The bill is expected to then go to Cabinet next week and must be rubber-stamped before it can be debated in the House. It will be treated as a conscience issue, which means MPs don't have to vote along party lines. Simon Bridges says he wants to see the final bill before he settles on a view.
I want to read it and really think about it before I launch into what will obviously be a controversial topic for New Zealanders.
New Zealand First has submitted an amendment to the end-of-life choice bill that would require a binding referendum at the 2020 election. The supplementary order paper under MP Jenny Marcroft's name calls for a binding referendum to ultimately decide whether or not euthanasia becomes legal if the bill passes through Parliament. The party leader Winston Peters and ACT leader David Seymour, the sponsor of the bill, came to the agreement in return for New Zealand First's support at the third reading. Ms Marcroft says it should not just be up to politicians who are elected for a short period to decide whether assisted dying becomes law. She says the public should have a vote on such a polarised debate. Two Rotorua iwi have signed an agreement to end an historical dispute over the land where the pink and white terraces once stood. The deed of undertaking was signed by Ngāti Rangitihi and Tūhourangi at the Waimangu Volcanic Valley yesterday. They will need to negotiate a settlement with the Crown for the Waimangu and Otukapuarangi land, which borders part of Lake Rotomahana. Te Mana o Ngāti Rangitihi Trust Chairman Leith Comer says the dispute goes back to the early 1800s.
There have been cases, particularly around the time of the pink and white terraces and who should take control of taking tourists to the pink and white terrace. We were involved in a number of disputes. Some of those disputes led to us fighting and shedding blood.
Leith Comer says the two iwi are putting that behind them to get back the culturally significant land. The investigation into Friday's gas explosion in Christchurch may take a year to complete. WorkSafe is now leading the inquiry to determine the cause of the blast at a home in the suburb of Northwood and says its investigations can take up to 12 months. The agency will continue to work with New Zealand Police and Fire and Emergency. A lawyer for the gas fitter who did work at the home the day before the explosion says he will cooperate with the inquiry. South Korea has fired warning shots at a Russian military aircraft. It says the plane violated its airspace off its east coast. The BBC's Laura Bicker reports from Seoul.
The Ministry of Defence said it scrambled a number of fighter jets, which took tactical action, including dropping flares and firing a warning shot. The Russian aircraft left South Korean airspace, but then entered it again around 15 minutes later, prompting the South Koreans to fire yet another warning shot. This is the first time a Russian military aircraft has entered South Korean airspace. It was one of 3 Russian and 2 Chinese military planes which were in the area at the time. There has been no reaction from Russian or Chinese officials.
Laura Bicker reporting. It's now 6:05. The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen is expecting another close game against the Springboks in Wellington this weekend. Last year, the two sides shared the 2-match series with just 2 points separating them both times. Hansen says it's a rivalry they enjoy because of the close nature of their matches.
You have a look at the history of the two teams in the last 4 years. There hasn't been a lot in it. You know, even beyond that, like the last 8 years. You know, I know we've won a couple of the games comfortably, but I think they're a very good side and, you know, they're building nicely for the World Cup.
Steve Hansen. Sheffield Wednesday have reported Newcastle to the English Football Premier League for their conduct during the appointment of Steve Bruce as their new manager. Bruce was announced as a Magpies' new boss last week, 48 hours after he resigned from his position at the Owls. Wednesday says there were still some outstanding legal issues to be resolved when Bruce's appointment was announced, and they have now registered their discontent at Newcastle's behaviour with the governing body. Golf legend Jack Nicklaus believes it will be tough for Tiger Woods to eclipse his record of 18 major victories. The 43-year-old Woods claimed his first major since 2008 at this year's Masters to move within 3 of fellow American Nicklaus. But having missed the cut at the PGA Championship in May, he again failed to make the final 36 holes at the Open in Northern Ireland. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Trevor Reekie speaks with Bella Fleck, king of the banjo. Kirsten Johnstone has a song crush on Slater Kenny. They don't play the banjo. And this week's after-dinner speaker, Eric Crampton, has his eye on IDI, which stands for Integrated Data Infrastructure, the constant striving for the government's left hand to be informed as to what its right hand is doing when you don't have an invisible hand to guide you. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, from After the News at 7. On RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, fine spells and a few showers, clearing by tomorrow afternoon. Auckland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Fine and cloudy periods, a few showers about Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country tonight, and in most places for a time tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, occasional rain, easing tomorrow evening. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, occasional rain, mainly light, clearing later tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, cloudy about the coast and Canterbury Plains with patchy drizzle, mainly fine inland, but areas of low cloud or fog. For Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine, but areas of low cloud or fog inland tonight and tomorrow. Chatham Islands, a few light showers. You're with RNZ National, and Dara Stewart is back with First Up at 5 a.m. tomorrow, followed by Susie Ferguson and Corin Dan on Morning Report. It's now 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks very much, Susanna. You're with Checkpoint, and it's Alex Perrottet. And breaking news, we can go to, near Auckland Airport, where 3 people have been arrested at a controversial site. The protesters were evicted from Ihumātao earlier today by the local iwi's Kaumatua, who support a Fletcher building plan to build a massive housing development on the land. The protesters say they're determined to stop the development in any way that they can. Our reporter Tom Furley is at the site now. What can you see, Tom?
Yeah, well, there's a very strong police presence here. They're blocking 2 roads: the main road into Ihumātao, and also the main road that runs perpendicular to it. They're standing probably 2 and sometimes 3 abreast. There's easily 50 or more police here, and it's my understanding from just talking to people here that this has been the case for about the last hour or 2 after they looked to move in a couple of portacoms, and there's been trucks going through because the protesters are on one side, the police obviously, and they've left space for trucks to access the site where they're going to be building, and so trucks have been coming to and fro carrying things. They've just put up a series of lights to light up some of the protesters at the front, and the protesters are easily outnumbered really. There's probably 50 max and well over that in terms of those police numbers. So yes, 3 arrests. Although things have been, since I got here anyway, things have been fairly peaceful. Whānau singing songs, although shouting shame as those trucks go by. They've just in the last 10 minutes sort of split off and to have a bit of a hui amongst the whānau here, who have been part of this protest for a long time, many months, to decide where to next, what they're going to do next, and left others who are sort of interested parties, people. There's various union representatives, families with their children here to show their support, and they're standing right up against the police while the whānau have their hui. They've also set up, it's a cool night, the sun has just gone down, it's pretty dark now, but they have set up a fire in a sort of steel bin, which is keeping some people warm, and certainly the expectation that they'll be here through the night, and perhaps for the coming days, and if not weeks.
Yeah, they're certainly showing some commitment to the cause. We heard it was fairly tense this morning. We're told now by police that those 3 that were arrested have been charged for obstructing the police, not for disorderly conduct, but actually obstructing the police efforts. Are you being told what exactly that was? Were they getting in the way of trucks accessing the site?
No. No one has been able to really elaborate too much on that. But if people are trying to get through into the site, as I mentioned, the police are sort of in rows of 2 and 3. There's a very strong presence here, and it looks like the police are going to be here for a while. A short time ago, the van drove up to the cordon, and police began carrying boxes out, which looked to contain sort of bags of food and that sort of thing. So it looks like they're also in it for the long haul as well. So it'll be a long night.
Okay, well, thanks, Tom. Thanks for getting out there and bringing us the latest Ihumātao there. And it looks like both camps are settling in, as Tom describes, and we could hear the horns from some of those vehicles going off in the background as he spoke to us. It's come up to 12 and a half minutes past 6. A Comancheros gang member who murdered a young father and tried to kill the man's wife has been jailed for life. Viliami Tāni shot Abraham Tu'uheava and his wife Yolanda in Mangere last May. Mr Tu'uheava was lured to Greenwood Road under the pretense of a potential drug deal before it all went horribly wrong. Our court reporter Annika Smith filed this report.
Abraham Tu'uhiawa went to Greenwood Road to carry out a late-night methamphetamine deal last year. Instead, the young father was shot, execution style, by Viliami Tani and his cousins. He and his wife Yolanda begged for their lives, but neither were spared.
The Tu'uhiavas were made to stand in between the two cars while you and the co-defendant pointed guns at them. They tried to run away. You caught them and ordered them off the side of the road into some bush. Mrs. Tu'uhiava crouched on her knees with her head in her arms. One of you shot her twice.
Justice Hinton said the fact Yolanda survived the ordeal was nothing short of a miracle. Mr. Tu'uhiawa wasn't so lucky. He was shot 7 times in the arm, back and head and died at the scene. Tani pleaded guilty to charges of murder and attempted murder in May. His cousins, Fesilao Tapaivalu and Mesui Tufui, were found guilty of the same charges after a trial last month. In the trial, the court heard the killing may have been a hit ordered by the Comancheros in Australia over bad blood between the gang and Mr. Tu'uhiawa. But Tani's defence lawyer Ron Mansfield said his client still maintained the shooting wasn't gang-related. Mr. Mansfield said the 26-year-old was sorry and had tried to make amends.
He's also remorseful, Mum, genuinely so, and was generally wanting to take part in a restorative justice conference, if nothing more, to provide some relief to the deceased and her family, that there was no need to continue to fear or have concerns regarding their safety.
Justice Hinton said it was unsurprising Mrs. Tu'uhiawa declined the offer. She said the woman, who still has a bullet lodged in her brain, was still suffering, more than a year on.
She is in constant pain and attends medical appointments 4 times a week. She cannot work because of her injuries, and her benefit leaves her only $20 at the end of the week after expenses.
The court also heard Mrs. Tu'uhiawa was now raising her 9-year-old son alone. Justice Hinton said the boy was struggling after the death of his father.
He wears his father's clothes and looks at pictures of him at night. Mrs. Tu'uhiawa writes that she is so grateful to be alive because she does not know how their son could cope without both of his parents.
The judge said Tani's own family had written to express their shock and sadness at the 26-year-old's actions. She said she was struck herself by the extensive damage done to both families through Tani's offending.
There could not be a more tragic illustration than this case of the true effects of gang membership and methamphetamine use.
Justice Hinton said the killing was, as the Crown had submitted, execution style and involved a high degree of brutality. She jailed him for life with a minimum non-parole period of 17.5 years. Tani's cousins will be sentenced next Friday. Atuiti ko te matua ko Annika Smith aho.
It's exactly 16 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Thanks very much for getting in touch with all your feedback. We've got a bit here on the lack of prize money for the Silver Ferns. Of course, the team winning the Netball World Cup just very, very early, in early hours of yesterday morning. David has got in touch and says netball will always be on the back foot regarding equality due to the fact there's no male professional netballers. If there was a men's version, there would be less of an uphill battle. Thanks, David. Cara from Wellington says it's high time that netball players who represent Aotearoa get paid. If it's good enough for the cricketers getting a haul of prize money, then the netballers must get a bigger prize. Of course, we've got to clarify that some netballers, of course, do get paid for playing. This is about the lack of prize money compared to other sports. Cara says, after all, these women did win. I think that's what everyone's reacting to. To bring us down to earth perhaps a little bit, someone else on the text says, since when was there an expectation that amateur sports people of any sex or code would get paid prize money? Netball might be semi-pro in New Zealand, but not on the international stage. It's not a sexism issue or comparable to professional codes. In a global perspective, this listener says, it's no different to the amateur New Zealand curling team expecting money. Thanks so much for all your feedback. Do keep it coming in. 2101 is the text. You can email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Of course, we're on Facebook and Twitter as well. After a meeting of the British government's emergency committee, COBRA, the Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt has outlined plans for a European maritime protection mission in the Gulf. It follows Iran's seizure of the British-flagged tanker, the Steno Impero, in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran claims the tanker was involved in a collision with a fishing boat, but it's widely believed the seizure is in retaliation to Britain's seizure of an Iranian ship near Gibraltar. The BBC's Lise Doucet has this report.
First images of the men seized at sea, the crew of the Steno Impero. Indians, Russians, a Latvian, a Filipino. Images released by Iran. Is this what life is like on board now? Or is this just for show? A crew member heard saying, "Don't look at the camera." Iran's flag flies here now. This ship suddenly seized on Friday in a dramatic raid. A British frigate in the Gulf was too far away that day to stop them. HMS Montrose will soon be joined by another warship at the end of this month. And Britain's now announced plans for a maritime protection force led by Europe, separate from the US's proposed force and its more aggressive approach to Iran. In Parliament today, the Foreign Secretary accused Iran of state piracy.
If Iran continues on this dangerous path, they must accept the price will be a larger Western military presence in the waters along their coastline, not because we wish to increase tensions, but simply because freedom of navigation is a principle which Britain and its allies will always defend.
How did we get here? This chapter began in faraway waters off the coast of Gibraltar. Iran accuses Britain of piracy here. This tanker laden with Iran's oil was seized by Britain on July the 4th for allegedly violating sanctions on sales to Syria. Iran warned there'd be payback. And its top diplomat Javad Zarif took to Twitter to accuse Britain of colluding in what he called the US's economic terrorism, a reference to its crippling sanctions. And today in Tehran, an Iranian spokesman had a clear message.
To all the countries that are calling on Iran to release the tanker, we ask them to tell Britain the same thing.
But this crisis is bigger than boats. It's hard to say what's next. Britain's new Prime Minister may chart a different course in these troubled waters, moving closer to the US. But there will need to be a deal to free this ship and its crew. And everyone agrees there needs to be much wider talks. But Iran says it won't be on board until sanctions are lifted, until it can move its oil through here in its own backyard.
Lise Doucet reporting at 6:20. An organisation advocating for debt relief in developing countries says New Zealand banker Andrew Pearce has likely negotiated a plea deal. If not, he faces up to 20 years in prison for his role in a multi-billion-dollar scandal which devastated the African nation of Mozambique. In a US court on Friday, Pearce admitted accepting some $67 million in bribes for facilitating phony loans to Mozambique, which crippled the country's economy. Eric Lecomte from the Jubilee USA Network has been following the case and told our reporter Matthew Tunison Mr. Pearce is going to have to be very helpful to US prosecutors if he's to avoid a lengthy sentence in a US prison.
We're dealing with a terrible financial crisis that the Mozambique people are wrestling with. And they are billions of dollars in debt. They're not able to pay the debt. The country is currently in default. And we look back the history of the crisis to 2016 when the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund cut ties for financing and funding for Mozambique. And that was a direct result of a terrible loan scandal that took place that Credit Suisse and VTB Bank, a Russian bank, were a part of, where $2 billion in secret loans were given to entities in the government of Mozambique. And those secret loans, which were supposed to help build the tuna fishing industry for poor and working people in Mozambique, didn't go to what the purpose of those loans were for. In actuality, that $2 billion was used to take boats and turn them into Mozambique military attack craft. And the loans were kept secret because of the finance minister, as well as a number of bankers that were involved. On Friday in New York, Andrew Pierce pled guilty to participating in this scandal and defrauding the people of Mozambique billions of dollars because he and 5 others that are charged in U.S. courts have been called responsible for taking roughly $200 million in bribes, leading to this terrible loan scandal, which eventually led to the default for Mozambique, one of the poorest countries in the world.
And what has Andrew Pierce actually admitted?
So Andrew Pierce in court on Friday admitted that he knew that he was taking illegal money. He knew that it was leading to defrauding the people of Mozambique.
And what sort of sentence is he looking at here?
He's looking at 20 years or more, not even looking at the fines, but just to head to jail. So he's 49 years old. If Andrew Pierce is convicted, he's looking at not getting out of jail until after he's 60 years old. Because he is one of the first 2 people to openly plead guilty, my sense is that he does have a plea deal, and he's turning over more information against other Credit Suisse bankers, other bankers, as well as other Mozambique financial officials that have been involved in this case. It seems very likely that he's cooperating with the U.S. Justice Department in order to try and put more people behind bars, as well as possibly go after the institution of Credit Suisse itself.
But he will likely go to jail, do you think?
Again, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think it would be very unlikely that Andrew Pierce does not see some jail time as well as serious fines for his involvement in this scandal.
That's Jubilee USA Network Executive Director Erica Lecomte speaking with RNZ's Matthew Tunison. Mr Pierce was released on a $3.7 million bond, that's New Zealand dollars, and allowed to return to his current home in the UK pending sentencing. At 24.5 past 6, it's still a few hours out, but around midnight tonight, New Zealand time, Britons will know who will be their new leader. The ballot for the Conservative Party leadership contest closed today, and so far, polls show Boris Johnson well ahead of his rival, the Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt. But who will Mr Johnson be leading in his party? Today, another minister, Sir Alan Duncan, resigned. Here's the BBC's political editor, Laura Koonsberg.
I just voted for Boris Johnson to be the next Prime Minister.
The envelopes should all have arrived.
Well, this is it. I'm about to post my vote for Boris Johnson.
Crosses in the box put by Tory members.
I felt that it would only be right to vote for Jeremy Hunt.
That will decide who the Prime Minister is for all of us. Either Jeremy Hunt, who's struggled to keep pace, or Boris Johnson, the front runner, will become the next Tory leader. But even before he's won, some ministers have quit because they wouldn't serve him.
Why have you decided to resign? You'll see my resignation letter in a minute.
Even one of them who worked alongside him at the Foreign Office.
I have very grave concerns that he flies by the seat of his pants and it's all a bit sort of haphazard and ramshackle. But there's no personal animosity of any sort. I just think he's going to go smack into a crisis of government.
Sir Alan even wanted the Commons to have the chance to block Mr Johnson becoming Prime Minister if he wins tomorrow, trying and failing to organise an emergency vote that could stop him becoming PM.
The fundamental principle of our democracy is that the Prime Minister is the person who can command a majority in the House of Commons, and that is untested and it is in doubt. And I thought that in order to avoid a constitutional crisis, we should test that on the Tuesday, tomorrow, before he goes to the Palace on the Wednesday.
Despite that, the Conservatives appear to be on the verge of knowingly choosing a leader who's loved and loathed at the start of this race. So at the end, it's Boris Johnson's to lose.
No one, not even here at Conservative headquarters, nor in the candidates' camps, can be sure of the final result. We'll only know when it's announced round the corner in Westminster at 11 a.m. But what we do know is the next Prime Minister will face a wall of resistance. And Boris Johnson's backers are sure he's the one with a chance of making it through.
Absolute resolve as Prime Minister, as the leader of this country, that we'll leave by the end of October. I think that's been missing. He'll restore Cabinet collective responsibility, so we've got a united team, and above all, inject a bit of optimism into this enterprise we're embarked on.
When the gazebos are back on Westminster's green, that means something big is about to happen. Tory members' overall verdict will be known before too long.
I'll be backing Boris to be the next Prime Minister.
My name's Aaron and I voted for Jeremy Hunt.
putting my vote behind Jeremy Hunt because it's the least worst option.
Whoever's next won't even please all of their people all of the time.
Laura Kearnsberger, Westminster. The least worst option sounds like democracy itself. It's 27.5 minutes past 6. Hard on the heels of the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landings, India has successfully launched a rocket into space in an attempt to safely land a rover on the moon. The $146 million mission is a bid to allow Indian scientists to carry out studies on the presence of water at the moon's south pole, unexplored by any other nation before. It would also establish India as a low-cost space power. The BBC's Rajini Vaidyanathan has the details.
3, 2, 1, 0.
From a small island off the Bay of Bengal, India's space dream soared to new heights. With the nation's orange, white and green flag painted on the side, the latest incarnation of the Chandrayaan programme, which means moon vehicle, took off at 2:43 p.m. Indian time. Across the country, people stopped to watch. At this school in West Delhi, students gathered to witness history.
It is a very wonderful day for every Indian because India has taken this initiative. I'm really proud to be an Indian.
I feel like India should do more projects like this. It is a huge opportunity for India.
Chandrayaan 2 is a 3-in-1 mission. India's mission's expected to touch down in September. When it does, it's hoping to become the first to land on the unexplored lunar South Pole. The country's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, has pledged to send an Indian into orbit by the year 2022. There's long been a debate about whether this country should be investing in space when so many people are living in poverty. But those behind this latest programme point out that at £116 million, it was a relatively low-cost mission, with a budget less than half that of the latest Avengers film.
Rajini Vaidyanathan with that report, and just coming up to the end of the program. Thanks for all your feedback. We'll just read out one. People were a little bit tough on Simon Bridges a bit earlier on. So we've got Jilly from Waiheke Island who says, I'm not a National Party supporter, but Simon Bridges is a nice bloke. And to his credit, said the ad was funny. Good on him. Thanks very much, Jilly, for getting in touch. Thanks to all of you for listening. That's Checkpoint for this evening. Have a great evening.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Greenpeace climbers are on their way down from the 20th floor of Wellington's tallest building after reaching the office of oil company OMV. 3 protesters have been arrested at the site of a housing development near Auckland Airport. The Law Commission is proposing major changes to the rules for dividing property when couples separate. And the Greens have taken down a Twitter ad satirising National Party leader Simon Bridges over his stance on electric cars. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7 o'clock.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
What they don't know, Karen, is where the illegal firearms are, the ones that are being used in crime. And this registration package isn't going to fix that.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
We found the consumer session really helpful as well around the cost of products and how you get access to these products, and should you go to a specialist or should all GPs be able to prescribe.
Up to date